For me, soil is the top layer of the earth, which is fundamental for life on Earth. Um, in so many ways, it feeds us, but it also is a sink for carbon. So it also makes our planet a nice place to live.
Understanding the soil is the active layer on the earth. So you have first you go from the mantle upwards or outwards, and the last layer you have the effects of climate, weather, and biological activity.
My background is actually in biology, applied biology. So I of course see life of course as a key word here. So soil life as the basis of a lot of ecosystem services and life in general. So yeah, I think that's it.
Nice question. And because I didn't grow up on a farm, I don't really have a personal connection with soil. So basically the way that I know soils is through my studies. So I think for me soils are mainly biological and chemical things that you have to understand for food production and stuff like that. So mainly that, and also I try to recognize like other perspectives. Like I think it can also be a very personal experience how you deal with soils, how you feel connected with soils. But it's a bit harder to explain, I think.
Okay.
The biggest threat of the soil ecosystems is that we do not really know how to manage them sustainable. So we ask a lot from our soils to feed us for food or for feed for our cattle, and we do that in a way that it asks too much. We already know that, and now the question is how do we manage that in a better way so we can stay alive on our earth in a pleasant way. So I think the biggest threat is that we do not really understand our soils yet. We ask too much from it because besides food, feed, we also ask the carbon storage for now. And we should search for ways we can do that in a nice balance so that we do not disturb our soils in such a way we cannot restore them. So the biggest threats are pollution and asking too much. For pollution is that the soil will stop functioning or isn't able to deliver anymore what we ask from it. In terms of farming, yields can go down, or in terms of the pollution gets so high that we pollute our groundwater because the soil isn't able to filter the pollutants anymore. Things like that.
Threat is humans, because we are so many and we need to grow so much food that we are constantly depleting the soil. So I guess the use of fertilizers and also just having high producing crops and then harvesting them, so you take out more and more nutrients and carbon out of the system. So I guess depletion of the soil, if that's called a threat. Yeah.
Soil is facing multiple threats, and they don't exist separate either in time or space. So for sure I could highlight, for instance, soil erosion by water or wind. I could talk about salinization, sealing, but my research focuses mostly soil contamination, in my case by pesticides, but in the group that I work we also look, for instance, into plastic contamination and other toxic substances. Of course, when the soil is, for instance, contaminated with these substances, there are, of course, effects, or may exist effects on soil organisms which may impair soil function. So loss of diversity, loss of services, the elimination of contaminants as well. So there is like in situ effects, but of course you can look further, and if you see contaminated soil being driven away, for instance, by wind, you can also think about health implications on humans, either like, for instance, farmers that live close to agricultural areas, but even elsewhere, because even by air, pesticides can be transported long distances. Yeah.
I think the main threat is humans in general, and mainly the way that I think there is a tendency that exploitation is the norm. Like everything is a lot of things are monoculture, and we want to be as productive as possible. And productive often means having the highest yield on the smallest piece of land. And I doubt whether that is sustainable for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
The consequences, we already see the consequences. Like there is a lot of land degradation, soil degradation. And I think that's only gonna be more important, especially in the face of climate change. And also there are more and more people in the world. There is less land available because we also want to dedicate land to nature. So we have to find alternative ways to create a healthy soil, and we have to start very soon.
To protect the soil as a researcher is, I think, as one of the first things I said, that we do not really understand, or we do understand a lot of the soil, but maybe not enough. So as a researcher, we can help to protect the soil, to keep on looking into the unknowns of the soil. So that's a very basic research answer. And as an individual, we can, I think we also protect our soil if we live in a way that we do not ask too much. So as a researcher, we can help into looking new ways of production, of yield, of food, but we can also look into better use of place. So, some soils do not provide food, but we can maybe use them for storage of carbon, and the other way around. Some soils are not good enough for the storage of carbon, but maybe can help us in creating enough food.
Mm-hmm.
So in looking into that, we can as a researcher look for the best way to use the soil, and as an individual we on the small scale, maybe at your own home, do not cover your soil, because soils need to be able to breathe freely. And things like that. Maybe once in a while, think about what you eat, and steer, make choices which steer in a more sustainable management of soil. That are things you can do as an individual.
I think as an individual, like who doesn't work in soil science, it's probably buying more organic crops, even though I know that this is not feasible for everybody on the planet to do, because then we still have a problem. I think if you have a garden, keep it like a bit more wild, so don't have just a few species, but have a mixture of different plants, or just keep it to grow and make it look messy, not like the Dutch gardens. As a researcher, be realistic and and try to study ways that we can effectively grow crops while keeping the soils sustainable.
So, well, we have, of course, like I would say the two pillars. So it's education, about raising awareness on how fragile our soil is. So you can start with education on awareness on the problems and the measures that you can take in hands. And this, of course, the research part, that you can look into intervention, that you can look into remediation if needed. But my research focuses mostly on understanding first, like the degree of contamination, which up to now, unfortunately, is rather unknown. So I focus on understanding first the degree of contamination, the hotspots of contamination, and if we can do something to prevent it. For instance, in my case, I work in agricultural areas, and there we look a lot into transition towards more sustainable food production, which may mean transition to organic farming, but may also mean something in between, more agroecological measurements. So it needs to be a tailored solution with farmers and in their environment, like political, societal, and so on. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, is to understand it better and all together move into transition pathways.
Well, as a scientist, it's basically doing my job, which is trying to find answers to questions about soils, trying to understand the processes, and that is of course important. If you want to protect them, you have to know how they work. And I think it's also important that if you get the results, that you make that you really try to make an effort to communicate about that with society, like with policymakers, but also the general public, because in the end, as a scientist, you still need to make your work actionable, that people can actually do something and that they know what you do